Trash belongs with trash. Those 4 words are etched into my memory forever. They were the last words my father Marcus said to me before he threw my grandfather's gift into a bucket of melting ice. He stood there in his rented tuxedo, preening like a peacock, convinced he had just asserted his dominance over the family. He thought he was tossing away a piece of garbage from a senile old man. He thought he was protecting his precious high society image from the stain of our humble roots. But here is the funny thing about arrogance. It often blinds you to the gold right under your nose. That soggy, dirty little book he tried to destroy was not trash. It was a key. A key that unlocked a door my father had been banging on his whole life but was never worthy enough to open. I am Zara, and as I sit here in my penthouse living room, sipping a vintage Cabernet that costs more than my father's car note, I can finally laugh about it. But 48 hours ago, I was not laughing. I was standing in a bank watching a manager go pale as a ghost when he saw what was inside that book. I was watching the color drain from his face as he realized the woman in the cheap dress standing in front of him was technically his boss. And my father, the man who called me worthless, the man who tried to cut me out of his life, is now begging for a singular dime of the fortune he threw away. He wanted to play games with inheritance and hierarchy. Well, he lost. Before I take you back to the moment everything exploded, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been the family scapegoat? Have you ever been the one they only call when they need something but hide when company comes over? If you have ever felt like an outsider in your own bloodline, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. I am going to share how I turned their cruelty into my empire, and trust me, you do not want to miss the look on my stepmother's face when the police arrived. This is not just a story about money. It is a story about justice. It is a story about how the person you step on to get to the top might just be the one holding the ladder. So get comfortable and maybe pour yourself a drink because this tea is piping hot. Let me take you back to 3 days before the wedding, to the beautiful vineyards of Napa Valley, where the air smelled like expensive grapes and the people smelled like desperation. That was where the nightmare began, and where I finally woke up. The vineyard in Napa Valley was breathtaking, with rolling hills of green vines soaking up the golden California sun. It cost $40,000 just to rent the patch of grass we were standing on, but all I could smell was the stench of pretension coming off my sister-in-law, Brittany. We were sitting in the private tasting room 3 days before the ceremony to finalize the reception details. Brittany was holding a linen napkin between 2 manicured fingers as if it were contaminated with a disease. "Zara, darling," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that made my teeth ache. "Are we absolutely married to the idea of braised short ribs? It feels a bit heavy, a bit rustic. My friends from the country club are used to lighter fare. Perhaps a sea bass or a delicate scallop. You know how people talk when the food is too heavy." I looked at my fiancé Kevin, expecting him to say something. I waited for him to remind her that I was a professional sous chef and I had designed this menu myself. I waited for him to say that short ribs were my favorite dish. But Kevin just checked his expensive watch and tapped away on his phone screen. "Babe, maybe she is right," he mumbled without even looking up at me. "We do not want people thinking we cut corners on the budget." That was Kevin, a man with a spine made of gelatin. I should have called the wedding off right then and there. But I was 32 years old, and exhausted from being the black sheep of a family that worshipped status above all else, so I bit my tongue until I tasted copper. "It is braised beef, Brittany," I said, keeping my voice level. "It is classic American cuisine." "It is peasant food," my father Marcus interrupted as he walked into the room. He was adjusting his silk tie, looking at his reflection in the glass door. He always wore a tie, even in the middle of a vineyard. He looked at me with cold eyes that assessed my market value rather than my happiness. "But the menu is the least of our problems, Zara. We need to discuss the guest list immediately." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly where this was going. I reviewed the final RSVP list. Marcus continued pouring himself a glass of wine that he had not paid for. "I see the name Ezekiel Washington is marked as attending." That has to be a clerical error on your part. He is my grandfather, Dad. I said, my hands clenching under the table. He is your father. He is a retired mechanic who smells like motor oil and cheap tobacco, Marcus snapped. The veneer of politeness vanished instantly. We have investors coming to this wedding, Zara. We have the regional vice president of the bank. I will not have that man shambling around in his moth-eaten polyester suit, embarrassing us in front of important people. He stays home, or I pull the funding for this entire circus. I looked at Kevin again. He was busy examining the label on the wine bottle, pretending he was invisible. The silence in the room was suffocating. My father was not asking for a favor. He was issuing a command. He wanted a picture-perfect wedding for his social media, and my grandfather did not fit the aesthetic. He raised you when Mom died, I whispered, fighting the sting of tears. He held me back. Marcus corrected his voice, devoid of any emotion. And I will not let him drag me down again. You have two choices, Zara. You can have the wedding of your dreams without him, or you can have nothing. Fix it. He walked out, leaving me alone with a gloating Brittany and a spineless husband. I looked down at the untouched plate of short ribs. Suddenly, I was not hungry anymore. Saturday arrived with the kind of aggressive perfection that only money can buy. The sky over Napa was a seamless dome of blue, and the air smelled of jasmine and expensive perfume. I stood before a full-length mirror in the bridal suite, staring at a stranger. The woman in the glass wore a $20,000 Vera Wang gown that Brittany had selected because my original choice was too simple. I looked like a meringue topping on a very expensive pie. My father Marcus had gotten his way. The venue was filled with 300 guests, but I barely recognized a dozen of them. These were not my friends. They were potential investors for his failing marketing firm and social climbers desperate to be seen near the cheese board. As I walked toward the holding area, I saw the seating chart. It was a masterclass in segregation. The front tables were reserved for the VIPs, the bankers, the lawyers, and anyone wearing a Rolex. Way in the back, near the kitchen doors and the restrooms, was table 24. That was where he had put my mother's side of the family. My Auntie May and Uncle Tyrell were sitting there looking uncomfortable in their Sunday best. Auntie May wore a bright purple church hat that I absolutely adored, but as I watched, I saw Mrs. van der Hoven point at it and whisper something to her husband. They both chuckled, covering their mouths with champagne flutes. The heat rose in my cheeks. My family looked vibrant and real in a sea of beige and cream, but they were being treated like staff who had accidentally sat down. I tried to move toward them to tell Auntie May how beautiful she looked, but the wedding planner intercepted me. She was a frazzled woman with a headset who looked at me like I was livestock. "Not yet, sweetie," she chirped, steering me physically in the opposite direction. "We need to get the golden hour shots with the groom's family first. Your father was very specific about the shot list." I looked for Kevin, hoping he would rescue me, hoping he would grab my hand and walk me over to hug my uncle. But Kevin was by the bar laughing with his groomsmen, doing shots of tequila and high-fiving over a joke I could not hear. He looked relaxed. He looked like he belonged here. I felt like an imposter in my own life, a prop in a stage play written by my father. The knot in my stomach tightened. I realized with a terrifying clarity that this was not a celebration of love. It was a merger, and I was the asset being traded to ensure my father maintained his status. I took a deep breath and forced the smile onto my face that I had practiced for years. Just get through the day, Zara, I told myself. Just survive until the cake cutting. Little did I know the real show was about to begin, and it was walking up the driveway in a beat-up Ford F-150. The valet stand was functioning like a well-oiled machine, a runway of wealth where status was measured in horsepower and leather upholstery. I watched from the terrace as a shiny black Bentley pulled up, followed immediately by a cherry-red Porsche. My father Marcus was in his element, beaming as he shook hands with the drivers, acting the part of the benevolent patriarch. He looked like he owned the world. Then the atmosphere shifted. A loud backfire echoed through the valley like a gunshot, causing several guests to jump and spill their champagne. Heads turned. The polite chatter died down. Chugging up the pristine white gravel driveway was a beast of burden that had seen better decades. It was my grandfather's 1998 Ford F-150. The paint was a faded, peeling blue, and the bumper was held on by what looked like duct tape and hope. A thick cloud of gray exhaust coughed out of the tailpipe, drifting over the line of luxury convertibles like a fog of war. Brittany gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "Oh my God," she shrieked, though she tried to keep her voice down to a harsh whisper. "What is that smell? It smells like raw gasoline and manual labor." She waved a manicured hand in front of her face, wrinkling her nose in genuine disgust. "Is that thing even legal to drive on the road?" My father's smile did not just fade. It evaporated. He looked as if someone had slapped him across the face. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He marched toward the valet stand, his polished shoes clicking frantically on the pavement. He looked like a general trying to contain a nuclear leak. "Get that vehicle around the back," he hissed at the poor valet, a college kid who looked terrified. "Do not park it out front with the guests. Hide it behind the catering tent, immediately. I do not want anyone to see it." But it was too late. The driver's side door creaked open with a groan of metal on metal that sounded like a dying wail. Out stepped Pop Pop. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing his Sunday best, a brown suit that was at least 20 years old, slightly shiny at the elbows, and a tie that was wide enough to land a plane on. He had a fresh haircut and he was beaming. He did not see the horror on his son's face. He did not see the sneers of the guests. He only saw the celebration. "Zara girl," he boomed, his voice raspy and warm, echoing off the stone walls. He bypassed the valet who was trying to take his keys with 2 fingers and walked straight toward the entrance. Brittany took a step back, physically recoiling as he approached. "Marcus," she whispered urgently, grabbing my father's arm. "Do something. He smells like old engine oil and mothballs. The investors are right there. You cannot let him hug them." My father intercepted him before he could reach the red carpet, blocking his path like a bouncer. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice tight, a forced smile plastered on his face that did not reach his cold, dead eyes. "You made it. Listen, why do we not get you seated inside, way inside? The air conditioning is better for you." "I want to see the bride," Ezekiel said, trying to look past him, clutching a greasy paper bag in his calloused hand. Later, Marcus snapped, grabbing his arm a little too firmly. "Right now we need to keep the entryway clear. You are blocking traffic." He signaled to a security guard. "Escort Mr. Washington to table 24, the one by the kitchen, and make sure he stays there." I watched, my heart breaking as my grandfather nodded, confused but compliant. He trusted his son. He did not realize he was being hidden away like a stain on a silk sheet. He did not know that his very presence was considered an insult to their carefully curated lie. The gift-giving ceremony was less about generosity and more about a tax write-off competition. It was a spectacle of excess designed to show exactly who had the deepest pockets in the room. Uncle Trey gave us a set of Waterford crystal goblets that cost more than my first car. My father's business partners presented a voucher for a honeymoon in the Maldives, which I knew was just a bribe to keep their marketing contracts secure. Every time I opened a box, I had to feign a level of excitement that was exhausting. I felt like a trained seal clapping for fish, while my father nodded approvingly from the sidelines, tallying up the value of his social standing. Then it was Brittany's turn. She did not just hand over a gift. She staged a production. She walked to the center of the dance floor, holding a small orange box that everyone recognized immediately. Hermes. The room actually gasped. A hush fell over the crowd as she handed it to me with a smirk that could cut glass. "Open it, Zara," she purred into the microphone, holding it a little too close to her mouth so her voice boomed through the speakers. I lifted the lid, revealing a silk scarf with an intricate equestrian print. It was beautiful, soft, and undeniably expensive, but her words poisoned it instantly. "It is for your neck, darling," she said loud enough for the people in the back to hear, It adds a touch of class, you know, and it distracts from the smell of onions and garlic you always seem to carry around from that kitchen of yours. Try not to stain it with grease, okay? It is dry clean only, and I doubt they have a cleaner in your neighborhood that can handle silk. The crowd laughed. A polite, cruel ripple of laughter that tore through me. Even Kevin chuckled, sipping his bourbon. That hurt the most. He did not defend me. He joined in. I placed the scarf back in the box, feeling like a child being scolded for playing in the mud. I wanted to throw it in her face, but I just whispered a thank you that tasted like ash. Brittany flipped her hair and sashayed back to her seat, looking like she had just won a pageant. Then the master of ceremonies, who had clearly not been briefed on the delicate family dynamics, cleared his throat. And finally, we have a special gift from the grandfather of the bride, Mr. Ezekiel Washington. The air sucked out of the room. My father, Marcus, practically lunged from his seat, making a slashing motion across his throat to the DJ, but it was too late. Pop was already standing up. He did not have a shiny box. He did not have a ribbon. He was clutching a brown paper lunch sack that was stained at the bottom with dark circular spots. He walked past the table of shimmering silver and crystal, looking like a survivor from a shipwreck washing up on a private beach. The silence was heavy and thick. I saw Brittany roll her eyes and whisper something to my father, who looked ready to have a stroke. The tension was not just palpable, it was suffocating. Everyone was waiting for the disaster. Everyone was waiting for the old man to embarrass us. Everyone except me. I just wanted to hug him, but I was frozen in place watching him carry that paper bag like it held the crown jewels. Pop reached into the breast pocket of his outdated brown suit, his hand trembling with a mixture of age and nerves. The entire room seemed to lean in, watching this train wreck in slow motion. He pulled out a handkerchief that was gray with age and tied carefully at the corners. It looked like something a hobo would carry, not a gift for a wedding that cost 6 figures. He stepped toward me, ignoring the glares from Brittany and my father. His eyes were watery and full of a love that felt completely out of place in this room of transaction and greed. "Zara, baby," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I do not have much. You know the pension does not pay what it used to. But I started this for you the day you were born. I put a little bit away every week, every single week for 32 years. It is all I have left to give." He held out the bundle. My heart swelled. I reached for it, wanting to take his hands, wanting to tell him that his presence was the only gift I needed, but I never got the chance. My father moved with the speed of a predator. He snatched the bundle out of Pop's hand so violently that the old man stumbled forward, catching himself on the edge of the table. Marcus untied the knot with aggressive, jerky movements. When the fabric fell away, it revealed a small blue book. It was battered. The corners were peeling, and there were dark stains on the cover that looked like coffee or maybe motor oil. It smelled of mildew. Marcus held it up by one corner like it was a dead rat. "A passbook," he scoffed, loud enough for the back row to hear. "A credit union passbook from the 1960s. Look at this, it is practically dissolving." "What is in here, Dad?" $5. 10. You interrupted my daughter's reception to hand her a piece of literal garbage. "It is not garbage," Pop said, his voice trembling. "It is for her future." "It is trash," Marcus roared, losing his composure entirely. The mask of the sophisticated businessman slipped, and the bully underneath came out. He looked at the silver champagne bucket next to him, filled with melting ice and expensive crystal bottles. With a sneer of pure disgust, he tossed the book. It hit the water with a sickening splash, sinking to the bottom among the ice cubes. The ink on the cover immediately began to blur. "Trash belongs with trash," Marcus spat, dusting off his hands as if he had touched something contagious. "Now get out of my sight before I have security drag you out." Pop let out a small, strangled sound. He reached toward the bucket, his hand hovering over the ice, but he was too humiliated to dive in after it. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and shame. He looked like a dog that had been kicked by its master. The room was dead silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Brittany was covering a giggle with her napkin. My husband Kevin was looking at his shoes. And in that silence, something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break. It was a quiet, final fracture. The daughter who sought approval died in that moment, and the woman who wanted revenge was born. I walked past my father, who was already signaling for the waiters to pour more champagne to distract the guests. I did not look at him. I walked straight to the silver bucket and plunged my hand into the freezing water. The ice cubes clinked against my skin, numbing my fingers instantly, but I did not flinch. I fished out the soggy blue book, shaking the water off its ruined cover. My father let out a harsh laugh. "Look at her," he sneered to the table of investors. "She prefers the trash. It must be genetic." I turned around, but I did not retreat. I walked over to the bandstand and took the microphone from the stunned lead singer. The feedback whined for a second, silencing the few people who were still whispering. I looked at Kevin first. My fiancé was still staring at his shoes, refusing to make eye contact. "Kevin," I said, my voice booming across the lawn, "you can stop checking your watch. You are free to go. In fact, you can go back to your apartment, which we both know my father is paying the rent for, because your startup has not made a profit in 3 years." Kevin's head snapped up, his face turning crimson. I pivoted to Marcus. "And Dad, you wanted a perfect wedding without any embarrassments. You wanted to impress these investors so they would overlook the fact that your company is leveraged to the hilt. Well, I am afraid I have bad news. I am not marrying into a merger to save your credit score. This wedding is canceled effective immediately." A collective gasp tore through the crowd. Brittany dropped her champagne flute, and it shattered on the patio stones. My father's face went from smug to purple in a heartbeat. "Zara, you are hysterical," he hissed, stepping forward. "Put the microphone down. Please enjoy the food." I continued, my voice deadly calm, ignoring him completely. "Although I am not sure who is going to pay for it, since the credit card on file was declined this morning and I had to put the deposit on my personal savings. I suggest you eat quickly before the caterers start packing up." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed like a gavel striking a block. I walked over to Pop Pop, who was still trembling by the table, clutching his chest. I took his rough, calloused hand in mine. It was warm and real, unlike anything else in this garden. "Come on, Pop Pop," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let us go get a burger. Somewhere that does not serve trash." We walked down the center aisle together, heads held high, leaving my father standing alone in the wreckage of his own ego, surrounded by unpaid bills and shocked investors. I did not look back, not even once. The morning after the wedding did not bring clarity. It brought a fever. I was sitting on the edge of a lumpy mattress in a cheap roadside motel, listening to the sound of my grandfather coughing. It was a wet, hacking sound that rattled in his chest like a bag of loose marbles. The stress of the previous day, combined with the chill from the garden, had taken a toll on his fragile body. I touched his forehead. He was burning up. He needed a doctor and he needed antibiotics. But as I looked around the dingy room, the reality of my situation crashed down on me like a tidal wave. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, praying for a miracle. The screen flashed red. -$350. My stomach dropped to the floor. The wedding venue had processed a cancellation fee at midnight. My father had sworn up and down that he had covered the deposit, but of course he had lied. He had put my credit card down as the security hold, and now I was the one paying for his arrogance. I was 32 years old, single, homeless, and completely destitute. I had no job because I had taken a leave of absence for the honeymoon that was never going to happen. I had no apartment because I gave up my lease to move into Kevin's condo. And now I had no money to buy my sick grandfather a bottle of aspirin. My eyes drifted to the radiator under the window. Resting there was the blue passbook. I had spent an hour the night before carefully blow-drying the pages, trying to salvage it. It looked pathetic. The cover was warped and stained a dark, ugly navy. The pages were crinkled like old skin and swollen from the water. The ink inside was so faded it was illegible. It looked exactly like what Marcus had called it, trash. A useless relic from a time that did not matter anymore. I picked it up, feeling the brittle paper between my fingers. Anger flared in my chest. Not at my grandfather, never at him, but at the unfairness of it all. This was my inheritance. This was the big surprise. A waterlogged booklet that probably contained $5 and some dust. I wanted to throw it across the room. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. But then Pop groaned in his sleep, shivering under the thin, scratchy motel blanket. I took a deep breath, forcing the panic back down. I could not afford to break. I had to be the adult. I had to fix this. If there was even $20 in this account, I would take it. $20 could buy soup. $20 could buy generic medicine. It was humiliating to think that my survival depended on $20. But pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I grabbed my purse and the ugly little book. I was going to the bank not because I thought I was rich, but because I had absolutely no other choice. I was walking toward the door with the weight of the world on my shoulders, unaware that the little blue book in my hand weighed more than the entire building I was about to enter. The First National Bank building was a fortress of limestone and granite that took up an entire city block. It was the kind of place that whispered old money and shouted exclusion. I stood on the sidewalk, smoothing down my wrinkled dress which I had slept in. I looked like a wreck. My hair was a mess, and my eyes were puffy from a sleepless night of worrying about Pop. As I pushed through the heavy revolving doors, the air conditioning hit me like a physical slap. It was quiet inside. The kind of quiet that makes you self-conscious about the sound of your own breathing. I had barely taken 3 steps across the marble floor when a shadow fell over me. The security guard was a wall of muscle in a uniform that was 2 sizes too tight. He stepped directly into my path, his hand resting casually near his belt. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. The words were polite, but the tone was not. It was the tone reserved for vagrants and solicitors. It meant you do not belong here, so turn around before I make you. "I need to speak to a teller," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have an account inquiry." He looked me up and down, taking in my scuffed shoes and the cheap purse I was clutching like a lifeline. "The bank is for customers only," he said. "The ATM is outside around the corner if you need cash." "I am a customer," I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Or at least my family is. Now please let me pass, or I will ask to speak to your supervisor about why you are blocking the entrance." He hesitated. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment, searching for a reason to kick me out. Finally, he stepped aside, but his eyes followed me like a hawk watching a field mouse. I walked toward the teller line, feeling the heat of his gaze burning a hole in my back. The bank was nearly empty. Behind the high glass partition, a young woman with perfectly highlighted hair was filing her nails. Her name tag read Jennifer, and she radiated boredom. When I approached the window, she did not even look up. Next, she called out to the empty room. I stepped up and placed the plastic bag containing the soggy passbook on the counter. Jennifer finally deigned to look at me. Her nose wrinkled slightly as if she had smelled something foul. "Can I help you?" she asked flatly. "I need to access this account," I said, sliding the bag forward. "It belongs to my grandfather, Ezekiel Washington. He is ill, and I have his power of attorney." She looked at the wet blue lump in the bag. Then she looked at me with open disdain. "Ma'am, we cannot accept damaged documents. That thing is destroyed. I cannot even read the branch number. You need to go to the records department downtown and file for a lost book replacement. It takes 6 to 8 weeks. "I do not have 6 weeks," I said, my voice rising. "I do not have 6 minutes. Look." I pointed to a faint line of numbers on the bottom of the cover that I had managed to decipher. "You can still see the account number here. Just type it in, please." Jennifer sighed a long, dramatic exhale that blew her bangs off her forehead. She looked at the clock on the wall, clearly calculating how much longer until her lunch break. She wanted me gone. She wanted to go back to her nail file. Fine, she snapped, pulling the keyboard closer. But if the system rejects it, there is nothing I can do. You will have to leave. She typed the numbers with aggressive speed, her acrylic nails clicking loudly on the keys. She hit enter with a flourish, expecting an error message. I held my breath, gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. I watched her face, waiting for the inevitable rejection. I was ready to beg. I was ready to cry. I was not ready for what happened next. The keyboard clattered under Jennifer's manicured fingertips, like a machine gun fire of indifference. She did not look at the screen as she typed. She looked past me at the security guard, rolling her eyes in a silent communication that said, "Can you believe this waste of time?" I stood there, clutching the edge of the marble counter, my palms sweating against the cold stone. The air in the bank felt suddenly thin. I watched her finger hover over the enter key, and for a split second I wanted to reach out and stop her. I wanted to snatch the book back and run before the rejection became official. But I was frozen. She hit the key. I expected a beep. I expected a flat, monotone voice saying, "Account not found." What happened instead was a sound I had never heard before. It was a sharp, piercing, electronic shriek that cut through the silence of the bank like a siren. The monitor in front of Jennifer did not just display text. It flashed. A bright, aggressive red light pulsed on the screen, reflecting off her glasses and illuminating her bored face in a demonic crimson glow. Jennifer jumped back in her chair, her hand flying to her mouth. "What on earth?" she gasped. The boredom vanished from her face, instantly replaced by something far more dangerous. Panic. She looked at the screen, then she looked at me. But this time she did not see a nuisance. She saw a threat. Her eyes widened, and I saw her hand slide under the desk. I knew that movement. Everyone who has worked in customer service knows that movement. She was hitting the silent alarm. "Ma'am," she said, her voice pitching up an octave, "please take a step back from the counter. Do not move your hands." "What is happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Is there money in the account or not?" "Security!" she shouted, not waiting for an answer. "We have a code red at window 4. Possible fraud in progress." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Fraud. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The security guard, the one who had been watching me since I walked in, was already moving. He unclipped the strap on his holster, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon. He was not walking. He was stalking toward me. I did not do anything. I stammered, backing away, my hands raised instinctively. "That is my grandfather's book. You can call him. Do not move." The guard barked, his voice booming in the cavernous room. "Put your hands on the counter where I can see them. Now." Tears pricked my eyes. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with a wedding, not with a honeymoon, but in handcuffs on the floor of a bank because I dared to hope for $20. I looked at the red screen, still pulsing its angry warning. I felt small. I felt like the trash my father said I was. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact of the guard's hand on my shoulder, waiting for the humiliation to be complete. I did not see the door to the manager's office fly open. I did not see the man in the expensive suit sprinting toward us. All I heard was the sound of my own terrified breathing and the accusation ringing in my ears. The heavy hand of the security guard clamped down on my shoulder, and I flinched. The weight of his grip confirmed my worst fears. I was going to jail over a misunderstanding, and my grandfather was going to die alone in a motel room. Tears burned the corners of my eyes as I opened my mouth to beg for mercy, but before I could make a sound, a commanding voice thundered across the lobby. "Stand down, officer. Immediately." The voice was deep and resonated with the kind of authority that does not need to shout to be heard. The guard froze, his hand still on my shoulder. We both turned to see a man striding toward us from the executive offices. He was an older gentleman with silver hair combed back perfectly, wearing a navy pinstripe suit that looked like it cost more than my father's entire wardrobe. This was Mr. Sterling, the branch manager. I had seen his picture on the wall, but in person he was intimidating. "Sir," the guard stammered, releasing me and stepping back. This woman triggered a code red. "The system says it is a fraudulent account number. I was just securing the suspect." Mr. Sterling did not even look at the guard. He walked straight up to the teller window and looked at the flashing red screen. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and squinted at the numbers Jennifer had typed. Then his gaze dropped to the wet plastic bag on the counter. He stared at the soggy blue lump inside for a long, silent moment. The air in the bank seemed to stand still. Jennifer was pressed against the back wall of her cubicle, looking like she wanted to disappear. Then Mr. Sterling did something that made my jaw drop. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a pair of white cotton gloves, the kind that archivists use to handle rare manuscripts or priceless artifacts. He pulled them on slowly, smoothing out the fingers with deliberate care. "Unlock the gate, Jennifer," he said quietly. Jennifer fumbled for the button, her hands shaking so badly she missed it twice. When the buzzer sounded, Mr. Sterling walked behind the counter. He bypassed the terrified teller and picked up the plastic bag with both hands as if he were holding the Holy Grail. He slid the wet book out onto a clean blotting pad. He did not look at the stains. He did not look at the water damage. He looked at the faded gold seal on the cover. "Ms. Washington," he said, turning to face me. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mr. Sterling bowed. It was not a nod. It was a formal, deep bow from the waist. A gesture of respect I had never seen a white man give to anyone in my family, let alone me. "My apologies for the reception," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have been waiting for this passbook to return to us for nearly 50 years. He looked at Jennifer, who was now pale as a sheet. "You almost had security arrest the sole beneficiary of our bank's founding trust. I suggest you go to the break room and pray that Ms. Washington is a forgiving woman, because if she is not, you will never work in finance again." Jennifer let out a small squeak of terror. The guard looked at his feet, his face burning red. Mr. Sterling gestured toward his office, holding the wet book like it was made of spun glass. "Please, Ms. Washington, come this way. We have a lot of paperwork to discuss, and I believe you are going to need a very strong cup of coffee." Mr. Sterling led me into an office that smelled of mahogany and old money. He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair that swallowed my small frame while he carefully placed the waterlogged book on his desk. He did not treat it like trash. He treated it like the Dead Sea Scrolls. He typed a few commands into his secure terminal and then turned to me, his expression grave but kind. "Ms. Washington, most people look at this book and see a $5 savings account from a railroad credit union. That is what your father saw. But your grandfather was not just a laborer, he was a visionary. In 1968, he did not just deposit his paycheck, he used this account to purchase stocks directly through a transfer agent." I stared at him, my hands shaking around the porcelain coffee cup he had given me. "Stocks," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "But we were poor. Pop fixed cars and worked on the tracks. We never had money for the stock market." Mr. Sterling smiled a small knowing smile. "That is the beauty of it." He bought what he knew. He bought shares in a company called Coca-Cola because he saw everyone drinking it. And he bought shares in a failing textile company called Berkshire Hathaway because he read about a young investor named Warren Buffett taking it over. He did not buy much, just a few $100s worth back then. But he checked a small box on the form that said Dividend Reinvestment Program. He leaned forward, his eyes intense behind his glasses. "Do you know what compound interest is, Zara? Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world. For 50 years, every dividend your grandfather earned was automatically used to buy more shares. And then those shares earned dividends which bought even more shares. It is a snowball rolling down a mountain for half a century. It gathered speed and size while the world forgot it existed." He turned his computer monitor around so I could see the screen. I squinted, expecting to see maybe $10,000. Maybe 20 if God was listening. That would be enough to pay for Pop Pop's medicine and get us a small apartment. The number on the screen was not 20,000. I blinked, trying to make sense of the commas. I counted them. 1 comma, 2 commas. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me lightheaded and dizzy. The room seemed to tilt sideways. $12,482,000.16. I sat there frozen. The silence in the room was deafening. I looked at the soggy blue book sitting on the desk, the one my father had thrown into an ice bucket, the one he had called garbage. It was worth more than his entire company. It was worth more than the vineyard we had stood in. It was worth more than every insult Brittany had ever hurled at me. Ms. Washington. Mr. Sterling asked, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. Are you all right? You look very pale. I think I am going to be sick, I whispered, clutching my stomach. 12 million. I had walked in here praying for $20 for soup. I had slept in a motel room that smelled of mildew because I could not afford a better one. And the whole time I was carrying an empire in my purse. The irony hit me so hard, I actually laughed, a dry, hysterical sound that frightened me. My father had thrown away $12 million because the cover was dirty. He had literally thrown away his salvation because he was too arrogant to look past the surface. Mr. Sterling turned the monitor back to face him and clasped his hands on the desk. His expression was serious, almost solemn, as if he were delivering a verdict. Ms. Washington, there is one more detail you need to understand, and it is perhaps the most important one. This account is structured as a bearer instrument within an irrevocable trust. I shook my head, still dazed by the numbers. I do not understand legal terms, Mr. Sterling. I am a chef, not a lawyer. What does that mean for my father? He slid a yellowed piece of paper across the desk. It was a photocopy of the original contract my grandfather had signed 50 years ago. He pointed to a paragraph at the bottom. Read this carefully. I squinted at the faded typewriter font. It read, "The assets within this trust shall be payable solely to the direct descendant of Ezekiel Washington, who presents this physical passbook at the time of maturity. No other claims shall be recognized." I looked up at Mr. Sterling, my heart pounding. Does this mean what I think it means? It means exactly what you think it means, he said, leaning back in his leather chair. Your grandfather was a very shrewd man. He knew that family dynamics could be complicated. He wanted to ensure that the person who eventually received this money was the person who cared enough to keep this little blue book safe. He did not name your father. He did not name you. He named the keeper of the book. A chill ran down my spine. I thought back to the moment in the garden, the ice bucket, the sneer on my father's face. Trash belongs with trash! So if my father had kept it, I asked, my voice trembling, if he had just put it in his pocket instead of throwing it in the ice. Then he would be sitting in this chair right now worth $12 million, Mr. Sterling said calmly. But he did not. He made a choice. He chose to treat his father's legacy as garbage. In doing so, he legally abandoned his claim. When you reached into that ice bucket, Zara, you did not just save a book. You claimed your inheritance. By the laws of this trust and the state of California, you are now the sole legal owner of these assets. Your father has no right to a single penny. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The realization washed over me like cool water. My father, the man who had controlled every aspect of my life with his money, the man who used his wealth as a weapon, was now powerless. He had thrown away his fortune because it looked dirty. He had discarded his future because it did not fit his aesthetic, Mr. Sterling opened a drawer and pulled out a sleek black folder. Now that we have established ownership, we need to protect it. I have taken the liberty of preparing the documents to transfer these funds into a modern holding company under your name. Your father will never know this money exists unless you decide to tell him. And judging by the way you are looking at that passbook, I suspect you are going to enjoy being the one in control for a change. I touched the warped cover of the blue book one last time. It was dry now, but the stains remained. They were battle scars. I looked at Mr. Sterling, and for the first time in days I smiled. A real, genuine smile. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Mr. Sterling opened a hidden compartment in his desk drawer and pulled out a small, sleek box made of anodized aluminum. He slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. Inside sat a card made of black titanium. It was heavy in my hand, cool to the touch, and carried the weight of a weapon. The Centurion card, the myth, the legend. I had only ever seen one in movies or flashed by billionaires at the restaurants where I worked in the kitchen. Now my name was etched into the metal. "This is linked directly to your new holding company," Mr. Sterling explained. "It has no spending limit. You can buy a coffee, or you can buy an island. The choice is yours." I ran my thumb over the raised letters. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not just relief. It was power. Pure, unadulterated power. I looked up at him. "I need cash," I said, my voice steady. "I need to get my grandfather out of that motel and into a real hotel. And I need clothes. I cannot walk into the Ritz-Carlton looking like this." Mr. Sterling nodded and pressed a button on his intercom. "Prepare a withdrawal for Mrs. Washington. $50,000 in large bills. Secure envelope." 10 minutes later, I walked out of the manager's office. The atmosphere in the bank had shifted. Jennifer, the teller who had tried to have me arrested, was nowhere to be seen. The security guard who had gripped my shoulder was now holding the door open for me, his head bowed low in deference. "Have a wonderful day, Ms. Washington," he murmured, refusing to meet my eyes. I stepped out onto the sidewalk into the bright afternoon sun. The city noise washed over me, honking taxis and shouting pedestrians, but it sounded different now. Before it was a chaotic noise that threatened to swallow me whole. Now it sounded like opportunity. I clutched the heavy envelope in my purse against my side. $50,000. It was more money than I had made in 2 years of sweating over hot stoves, and it was just pocket change compared to what I really had. I caught my reflection in the glass window of the bank. I was still wearing the same wrinkled dress. My hair was still a mess. I still looked like the woman who had been kicked out of her own wedding. But something in my eyes had changed. The fear was gone. The desperation was gone. In their place was a cold, hard resolve. I was not just Zara the scapegoat anymore. I was Zara, the CEO of Big Mama's Legacy LLC. I was the woman who held the keys to the kingdom. I hailed a taxi, not checking the price, not worrying if I had enough change. "Take me to the Four Seasons," I told the driver. "And wait for me while I check in. I have a lot of stops to make today." As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the bank one last time. My father thought he had thrown away trash. He had no idea he had just armed his enemy. The war had just begun, and for the first time in history, the underdog had the bigger guns. While I was busy upgrading my life in a quiet office at the bank, my father and brother were experiencing a very different kind of afternoon. Across town, in the study of the penthouse apartment that he could no longer afford, Marcus was sweating through his Egyptian cotton shirt. The air in the room was thick with the smell of stale scotch and panic. My brother Trey was pacing back and forth, his designer loafers squeaking on the hardwood floor, looking less like a tech entrepreneur and more like a cornered rat. The crypto market had taken a nosedive that morning. The graph on Trey's laptop screen was a steep red cliff that went straight down to zero. They had leveraged everything. The cars, the apartment, even the business loans. They had bet it all on a digital coin that was now worth less than the electricity used to mine it. And to make matters worse, the phone on Marcus's desk had been ringing non-stop for an hour. It was not the bank. It was the private lenders. The kind of lenders who did not send letters. They sent guys with baseball bats. "We need 50,000 by Friday," Trey stammered, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "If we do not pay the interest, they are going to take the cars. They are going to come for the furniture, Dad." "Shut up, Trey, I am thinking," Marcus roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany desk. He poured himself another drink, his hands shaking visibly. The facade of the wealthy patriarch was cracking. He was just a broke, desperate man in an expensive suit. He needed a lifeline, and he needed it fast. He needed someone he could bully, someone weak, someone who played by the rules and saved their money while he spent his. His eyes landed on a family photo on the shelf. It was an old picture from before he had scrubbed me from his public image. He stared at my face, and a slow, twisted smile spread across his lips. "Zara," he whispered. Trey stopped pacing. "What about her? She is a chef, Dad. She makes minimum wage." "She is a saver," Marcus said, turning to face his son. "She has been working double shifts for 5 years. She drives a 10-year-old car. She lives in a shoebox. She never spends a dime on herself. She must have a nest egg, maybe 30, maybe 40,000. Trey's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "You are right. She was bragging about saving for a house deposit last Christmas. She owes us," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength as he rationalized his own greed. "She canceled the wedding. She humiliated us in front of the investors. That deposit money is gone because of her little stunt. It is only fair that she reimburses the family. It is a debt, Trey. We are just going to collect what is ours." It was sickening how quickly they twisted the narrative. In their minds, they were not thieves planning to rob a family member. They were victims seeking justice. They were the injured party. Marcus grabbed his car keys, the fear in his eyes replaced by the cold determination of a shark smelling blood in the water. "Get your coat," Marcus barked. "We are going to pay your sister a visit, and we are not leaving until she writes us a check." They marched out of the penthouse filled with righteous indignation, unaware that they were about to walk into a buzzsaw. They thought they were going to shake down a helpless kitchen worker. They had no idea they were driving straight toward a woman who could buy and sell them 10 times over without breaking a sweat. The hunters were coming, but the prey had just bought a tank. I had just finished settling Pop into the only armchair in the room when the pounding started. It was not a polite knock. It was a demand. The flimsy wood of the motel door shuddered against the frame, as if someone were trying to break it down. I knew exactly who it was before I even turned the lock. Only one person knocked with that kind of entitlement. I opened the door and found my father Marcus standing there, flanked by my brother Trey and his wife Brittany. They looked completely out of place in the dingy hallway, with their designer coats and manicured presents, looking like royalty visiting a prison. Brittany stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her nose wrinkling immediately. "Oh my God, Zara," she said, waving her hand in front of her face. "It smells like mildew and bad life choices in here. How can you live like this?" She ran a finger over the laminate counter and pulled a face. "I hope you have hand sanitizer because I feel dirty just standing on this carpet. Do not tell me you are actually sleeping on these sheets." Marcus did not comment on the decor. He was too focused on his mission. He paced the small room like a caged tiger, his eyes scanning for anything of value. He looked sweaty and manic, his expensive shirt clinging to his back. "Zara, sit down," he commanded, pointing to the sagging bed. "We need to have a serious conversation about family obligations." I crossed my arms, leaning against the kitchenette counter, keeping a protective distance from Pop, who was watching them with wide, fearful eyes. "I am listening, Dad," I said, keeping my voice cool. "What do you want?" "What?" "We are in a tight spot," Marcus said, his voice tight. "The market is volatile right now, and we have some liquidity issues. Nothing serious, just a temporary cash flow problem, but the lenders are being unreasonable." He stopped pacing and looked me dead in the eye. "I paid for your education, Zara. I put a roof over your head for 18 years. I raised you when your mother died. Now it is time for you to pay me back." I almost laughed. "Pay you back?" I asked. "You kicked me out of my own wedding yesterday. You called me trash. You left me and your own father on the street." "That was a heat-of-the-moment thing," Trey chimed in, trying to sound reasonable, though his eyes kept darting to the door. "Dad is stressed. But facts are facts, Zara. You cost us $30,000 with that little stunt at the vineyard. That was family money, And since you are the one who canceled, you should be the one to reimburse us. Brittany inspected her nails, looking bored. Come on, Zara, we know you have savings. You have been working like a dog for years and you never buy anything nice. Just write the check so we can get out of this dump. My skin is starting to itch. Marcus stepped closer, invading my personal space. This is not a request. It is a demand. You owe me for the gift of life, Zara. You owe me for every meal I put on the table. If you have a nest egg, I want it. Consider it a retroactive rent payment. I looked at them. Really looked at them. They were sharks circling a wounded seal. They thought I was helpless. They thought I was desperate. They had no idea that the purse sitting on the counter behind me contained a titanium card with a $12 million limit. They wanted my savings. They wanted the peanuts I had scraped together. It was pathetic. And it gave me an idea. A wonderful, terrible idea. I decided to play the role they expected. I decided to be the victim one last time. I looked my father dead in the eye and lied with the ease of a sociopath. I do not have $30,000, Dad. I spent my savings on the deposit for the venue. The deposit that you claimed you paid. The money is gone. The room went deadly silent. I could hear the hum of the mini fridge and the sound of Pop-Pop breathing shallowly in the corner. Marcus turned a shade of red that I had only seen once before when his golf club membership was revoked. He did not scream. He vibrated with rage. But it was Brittany who snapped. "You little liar," she shrieked. She lunged at me. It happened so fast I barely had time to brace myself. Her manicured hands slammed into my shoulders, shoving me hard against the kitchenette counter. The edge of the laminate dug into my lower back, sending a jolt of pain up my spine. Pop-Pop cried out from the chair, struggling to stand up, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Do not touch her!" Pop-Pop yelled, his voice weak but fierce. Brittany ignored him. She was in my face now, her perfume overpowering the smell of mildew. Her eyes were wide and manic. "We know you have money, Zara. You are a hoarder. You hoard cash while we suffer. You are selfish. You are an ungrateful parasite. After everything Marcus did for you, he took you in, he fed you, and this is how you repay him, by lying, by hiding your money like a rat." I stood there, pinned against the counter. My first instinct was to shove her back. I wanted to grab her by her expensive silk blouse and throw her out of the room. I wanted to pull out the black titanium card in my purse and laugh in her face. I wanted to tell her that I could buy her life with a single swipe. But I stopped myself. A cold calm washed over me. If I fought back, they would leave. If I revealed my hand now, I would win the battle but lose the war. I needed something permanent. I needed them to sign their rights away. I needed them to think I was broken so they would make a mistake. I let my shoulders slump. I forced tears into my eyes. I made myself look small. I made myself look like the beaten-down daughter they always wanted me to be. "Please stop," I whimpered, cowering slightly. "I really do not have the cash. Please, Brittany, you are hurting me." Brittany sneered, pulling back as if touching me had contaminated her. "Then give us something else. Give us your car. Give us your jewelry. I do not care what it is, but you are not walking away from this debt." I took a shaky breath and turned to my purse. I made a show of fumbling with the zipper, acting terrified. I reached past the envelope containing the $50,000. I reached past the Centurion card. My fingers closed around the only thing they would recognize, the only thing they would despise. I pulled out the blue passbook. It was dry now, but it still looked pathetic. The cover was warped and stained. It looked exactly like trash. I held it out, my hands trembling theatrically. "This is all I have left," I whispered. Pop-Pop gave it to me. There might be something in here. Marcus looked at the book and then he looked at me. His expression shifted from anger to pure, unadulterated disgust. He looked at that book the same way a man looks at a dead cockroach on his dinner plate. And in that look I knew I had him. The trap was set, and he was walking right into it with his eyes wide open. I held the book out like a peace offering. My hand was shaking, and for once I did not have to act. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins, making my fingers tremble. "This is it, Dad," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. "Pop said it was for my future. He said he saved for years. Maybe there is a few $100s in there. Maybe 1,000. You can have it. Just please leave us alone." Marcus looked down at the object in my hand. His upper lip curled in a sneer that was so familiar it made my stomach turn. He did not see a fortune. He saw a waterlogged piece of cardboard that smelled like the bottom of a pond. He saw the symbol of everything he had tried to escape: poverty, struggle, the working class. To him, that book represented every moment of shame he had felt growing up poor, and he hated it with a visceral intensity. "You are joking, right?" he said, his voice flat and dangerous. "You are offering me a wet book. I need $30,000, Zara. Not a stack of moldy paper." "It is money," I insisted, pushing it toward him desperately. "It is an account. You can go to the bank. You can claim it. It is his life savings, Dad." He laughed. It was a harsh barking sound that bounced off the thin walls of the motel room. He stepped forward, and with a swift, violent motion of his polished Italian leather shoe, he kicked the book out of my hand. It flew across the room, skidding on the cheap industrial carpet until it hit the wall with a dull thud. The cover flapped open, revealing the faded, yellowed pages inside. Pop made a small sound of distress from his chair, but I kept my eyes locked on my father. "I do not want his scraps," Marcus spat, adjusting his suit jacket as if the mere proximity to the book had soiled him. "I have spent my entire life getting away from that man's stench. I am not going to walk into a bank holding that piece of trash. Do you know who I am? I am Marcus Washington. I deal in millions, not pocket change from a senile old man." Brittany giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. "It probably has $10 in it," she mocked. "Maybe enough for a combo meal. Although looking at you, Zara, you could use a salad instead." I scrambled across the floor on my hands and knees, moving toward the book. I cradled it against my chest, acting the part of the desperate, broken daughter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they could hear it. He had done it. He had rejected it again. Explicitly. Violently. But words were wind. I needed ink. I needed to make sure he could never come back and claim he did not know. I needed to seal this tomb so tight that not even a ghost could get out. "But it is an inheritance," I cried out, looking up at him with tears streaming down my face. "If you do not want it, then sign it over to me. Make it official. If I am going to be the one taking care of him, then let me have his trash legally. Maybe I can buy him medicine with it. Maybe I can buy him a hot meal." Marcus looked down at me, kneeling on the dirty floor. He saw a broken woman. He saw a defeat. And that made him feel powerful. That fed his ego in a way that money could not. He saw an opportunity to sever the final tie to his past and punish me at the same time. "You want that garbage?" he sneered, towering over me. "You want to be the queen of the scrap heap just like him? Fine. If it will shut you up and make you realize you still owe me the real money, I will sign whatever you want. I want nothing to do with it. Nothing. Just get the paper so we can leave this godforsaken room." I looked down to hide the triumph that flared in my eyes. I wiped my face, pretending to wipe away tears, but I was really hiding a smile. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered. "I have the papers right here." I reached into my bag, bypassing the heavy envelope containing $50,000 and the cold metal of the Black Centurion card. My fingers closed around the crisp white folder that Mr. Sterling had prepared for me just hours ago. It felt like a loaded gun in my hand. I pulled it out slowly, making sure my hand trembled just enough to sell the performance. I was not just a daughter anymore. I was a fisherman casting a line into the water and waiting for the shark to bite. "This is a liability waiver, Dad," I said, my voice shaking. "I went to a legal aid clinic this morning. They told me that because you are Pop's direct heir, the hospital could come after you for his medical bills. They said his debts could become your debts if he passes away." The word debt acted on Marcus like a taser. He flinched physically. His eyes widened and the arrogance dropped from his face for a split second, replaced by the primal fear of a man who was already drowning in financial ruin. He snatched the paper from my hand so fast he almost gave me a paper cut. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, scanning the document frantically. "What medical bills?" "The old man has Medicare, doesn't he? It does not cover everything," I lied, watching his eyes dart across the page. "The ambulance, the specialists. It is adding up fast, Dad. Thousands of dollars. And since you are his son, the state will look to you for payment unless you legally sever your financial ties." Marcus looked at the document. The header read, "Disclaimer of interest" in bold black letters. It was a standard legal form used to refuse an inheritance, but to a panicked man who saw the world as a series of financial traps, it looked like a shield. He did not see that he was disclaiming $12 million. He only saw that he was dodging a potential bill for a hospital stay. Brittany groaned from the doorway, fanning herself with a magazine she had picked up with 2 fingers. "Just sign it, Marcus. We do not need his debt. We have enough problems with the liquidity of the firm right now. If the creditors find out you are liable for your father's bills, they will freeze our accounts." Trey nodded aggressively. "She is right, Dad. Cut him loose. We cannot afford any more baggage. Sign the paper and let Zara deal with the mess. That is what she is here for, right? Cleaning up messes." Marcus pulled a gold Mont Blanc pen from his jacket pocket. It was a beautiful writing instrument worth more than the car I drove. He uncapped it with a sharp click. He looked at me one last time, and his eyes were cold and hard like polished stones. "You are actually doing something useful for once, Zara," he said, sneering. "You are right. I should not be burdened by his failures. I have built my own legacy. I am not going to let him drag me down to the gutter with him." He pressed the pen to the paper. The sound of the nib scratching against the fiber was loud in the quiet room. He signed his name with a flourish. Marcus Washington. A signature that usually commanded respect. A signature that usually authorized mergers and acquisitions. But today it was the signature of a fool signing away a kingdom for the price of a lie. He handed the paper back to me with a look of relief, as if he had just escaped a burning building, not realizing he had just locked himself out of the only fire escape. "There," he said, tossing the pen onto the stained motel duvet. "It is done. I, Marcus Washington, formally wash my hands of that man and his pathetic financial failures. If the hospital calls, tell them he is a ward of the state for all I care. Just keep his debt away from my assets." He looked at the paper with a smug satisfaction, as if he had just pulled off a brilliant business maneuver. He had no idea he had just signed the most expensive autograph in history. He had no idea that with those few strokes of ink he had legally severed himself from a $12 million trust fund. He thought he was dodging a bullet, but he was actually stepping in front of a train. "And another thing," Marcus added, his voice dripping with venom. "Do not expect me to pay for a funeral either. When he finally kicks the bucket, just cremate him and scatter the ashes in a junkyard." It is fitting. That is where he spent his whole life anyway, scavenging for scraps. He lived like a rat, he can rest like one. I felt a flash of pure white-hot rage burn through my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that the man he called a rat had more dignity in his little finger than Marcus had in his entire body. But I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. I picked up the document, my hands trembling not with fear, but with the sheer effort of holding back my triumph. I blew on the ink to dry it, sealing his fate forever. "You are free, Dad," I said quietly, tucking the paper into my folder. "You do not have to worry about him ever again." "Good," Marcus said, straightening his tie and checking his reflection in the dirty mirror. "Come on, Brittany, let us get out of this shithole. The smell is making me nauseous. And Zara, do not think this gets you off the hook for the 30,000. You still owe us. I expect a payment plan by Monday." He walked out the door without looking back at his father. He walked out believing he was the winner. He walked out believing he was the smartest man in the room. I watched the door close behind them, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of poetic justice. I looked at Pop Pop, who was watching me with sad, confused eyes. I walked over and kissed his forehead. "They are gone, Pop Pop," I whispered, pulling the blanket up to his chin. "And they can never hurt us again. I promise." I walked to the window and watched them get into their leased Mercedes. As they drove away, kicking up dust in the parking lot, I finally let myself smile. It was a cold, sharp smile. He wanted a payment plan. Oh, I would give him a payment plan. I would pay him back for every insult, every neglect, and every cruelty. But the currency would not be cash. It would be consequences. And the first installment was due very soon. The silence that followed their departure was heavy, but it was not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes after a violent storm passes, leaving the air charged with electricity. I stood up from the floor, dusting off my knees, where I had knelt in mock supplication. The tears I had forced out dried instantly on my cheeks. I walked over to the door and threw the deadbolt, listening to the satisfying click of metal sliding into place. Then I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my phone. The screen was still glowing with the red timer of the voice memo app. It had been running for 14 minutes and 32 seconds. I pressed the stop button and saved the file. I named it The Verdict. Then I pressed play. My father's voice filled the small motel room, tinny and distorted by the speaker, but unmistakably cruel. I heard him call my grandfather a rat. I heard him call the passbook trash. I heard the scratch of the pen as he signed away his birthright. Pop Pop looked at me from the armchair, his eyes wide and sorrowful. "Why did you make him do that, Zara?" he asked, his voice trembling. "He is my son. I did not want him to hate me." "He has hated us for a long time, Pop Pop," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking his hand. "This was not about making him hate you. This was about protecting us. If I had not done this, he would have come back. Once he found out about the money, he would have sued us. He would have dragged you into court. He would have claimed he was the rightful heir, and he would have won because he has expensive lawyers. We needed a shield, and he just gave us the strongest one in the world." I picked up the document from the counter. The ink was dry. The signature, Marcus Washington, was bold and arrogant, unaware of its own cost. I folded the paper carefully, treating it with more reverence than the Magna Carta. I walked over to the closet where I had hidden a heavy fireproof lockbox I had purchased earlier that afternoon with cash. I placed the document inside, right next to the $12 million passbook. I spun the dial, locking them away. Click, click, click. The sound was like the closing of a prison cell, but for once, we were on the outside. I lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. My father was probably laughing right now, in his car, telling Brittany how he had dodged a bullet. He was probably congratulating himself on his business acumen, thinking he had outsmarted his simple chef daughter. Let him laugh. Let him enjoy his victory lap. Because when the truth finally came out, when he realized that he had signed away a fortune to avoid a debt that did not exist, the shock would be terminal. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I slept without worrying about tomorrow. I knew exactly what tomorrow would bring. It would bring retribution. The victory I felt watching my father drive away lasted exactly 6 hours. At 3 in the morning, I woke up to a sound that haunts me to this day. It was a guttural, gasping noise, like someone trying to breathe through a straw. I shot up in bed and saw Pop Pop clutching his chest, his face a terrifying shade of gray. The sweat on his forehead was cold and clammy. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes and whispered my name before slumping back against the pillows. Panic is a funny thing. It makes time slow down. I remember dialing 911, my fingers fumbling over the screen. I remember the flashing lights of the ambulance reflecting off the dirty motel walls, turning the room into a disco of tragedy. I remember holding his hand in the back of the rig, begging him to stay with me, telling him that we had won. Telling him that everything was going to be different now. But he just squeezed my fingers weakly, his grip fading with every bump in the road. At the hospital, it was organized chaos. Doctors in blue scrubs swarmed around him, shouting medical terms I did not understand. Myocardial infarction, arterial blockage, PrEP OR2. I stood in the hallway, pressed against the cold, white wall, feeling utterly useless. I was not a CEO in that moment. I was just a granddaughter watching the only person who loved her fade away. Then came the second blow. A woman with a clipboard and a face made of stone approached me. She was the hospital financial counselor, a title that really meant gatekeeper. She looked at my wrinkled clothes. She looked at the intake form where I had listed our address as a motel. "Ms. Washington," she said, her voice devoid of empathy, "your grandfather is in critical condition. He needs a triple bypass surgery immediately to survive. However, I see here that his insurance is basic Medicare, which does not cover the specialized cardiac team he needs for a high-risk procedure like this." I stared at her, blinking. "So do the surgery," I said. "Save him." "It is not that simple," she replied, tapping her pen on the clipboard. "Without comprehensive coverage, we require a deposit before we can prep the surgical suite. The hospital has a policy regarding high-risk cases with insufficient funds. We need $150,000. Up front." I felt the blood drain from my face. $150,000. It was a ransom note. They were holding my grandfather's life hostage for a check. And if I cannot pay, I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "Then we will stabilize him and transfer him to the county hospital," she said calmly. "They have a waiting list, but they will take him eventually." Eventually meant dead. She was telling me that my grandfather would die in an ambulance on the way to a charity ward because he was poor. I looked at the doors to the ER where doctors were fighting for his life. I felt the heavy weight of the black metal card in my purse. I could end this right now. I could slap that card on her clipboard and buy the whole wing. But a dark, twisted thought entered my mind. My father. He had signed the paper, but he had not passed the final test. I needed to know. I needed to know with absolute certainty that there was no humanity left in him. "Give me 5 minutes," I told the woman, my eyes burning with tears. "I need to make one phone call." I stepped into the alcove near the vending machines where the hum of the refrigeration unit masked the sound of my ragged breathing. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone twice before I managed to find his contact. I knew the answer before I even pressed the green button. I knew exactly who he was. But the little girl inside me, the one who used to wait by the window for him to come home, still had a tiny flicker of hope. She needed to be extinguished. She needed to die so that the warrior could take her place. I pressed call, listening to the ringtone echo in the emptiness of the sterile corridor. It rang 4 times. Finally, he picked up. There was no concern in his voice, only irritation. "Make it quick, Zara," he said. "I am in the middle of a hot stone massage." I could hear soft flute music in the background. I could hear the clink of glass on glass. While my grandfather lay gasping for air on a gurney, my father was lying on a heated table with cucumbers on his eyes. "Dad," I said, my voice cracking. Pop is dying. He had a massive heart attack. We are at the hospital now." So Marcus sighed, a long, exasperated sound. "He is 90 years old, Zara." Hearts stop. That is what they do. "Why are you calling me?" "They can save him," I pleaded, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. "There is a surgery, a bypass. But they need a deposit, Dad. They need $150,000 right now, or they are going to transfer him to the county ward. He will not make the trip. He will die in the ambulance. Please, I know you have it. Just loan it to me. I will pay you back. I will work for the rest of my life to pay you back." I heard Brittany's voice in the background, muffled and shrill. "Is she asking for money again? Tell her to get a job." Marcus chuckled. "You heard her. Look, we discussed this yesterday. I signed the paper, Zara. That disclaimer was not just for his debts, it was for his drama. I am not his bank, and I am certainly not yours. You wanted to be his savior, so go save him." "Dad, please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "He is your father. He held you when you were a baby. Does that mean nothing to you?" "It means nothing," Marcus said, his voice turning ice cold. He lived a worthless life and now he is dying a worthless death. Do not ruin my spa day with your hysteria. If he dies, call the city morgue. They bury indigent people for free. Just do not call me." The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence. The tiny flicker of hope in my chest sputtered and went out. It was replaced by a cold, hard darkness. I looked at the phone in my hand. He had made his choice. He had chosen a hot stone massage over his father's life. He had chosen greed over blood. I wiped the tears from my cheeks. They were the last tears I would ever shed for Marcus Washington. The mourning was over. The execution was about to begin. I put the phone in my pocket and walked back toward the financial counselor. I did not look like a scared granddaughter anymore. I looked like someone who was about to buy the entire building just to fire the staff. The financial counselor was already reaching for the transfer forms when I returned. She did not even look up from her paperwork, assuming I was there to sign my grandfather's death warrant. I stood there for a second, watching the top of her head, feeling a cold calm settle over me. Then I reached into my purse. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out cash. I pulled out the slab of black titanium that Mr. Sterling had given me. I dropped it onto the counter. It hit the cheap laminate surface with a heavy metallic clink that sounded like a gavel striking a block. The woman paused. She looked at the card. Then she looked closer. Her eyes widened until they were almost perfectly round. She knew what that card was. Everyone in the service industry knew what that card was. It was an invitation-only Centurion card. It was not just money. It was a key that unlocked the world. The color drained from her face as she looked up at me, seeing me for the first time, not as a pauper in wrinkled clothes, but as a predator who had just been insulted. "Swipe it," I said, my voice low and steady. "And do not just charge the deposit. I want the VIP package. I want the best surgeon you have on staff. I want the private recovery wing. And I want the chief of medicine down here personally to oversee the intake, right now." She did not argue. She did not ask for ID. Her hands shook as she picked up the card, handling it like a religious artifact. She ran it through the machine. Approved. The receipt printed with a sharp zip sound that felt like victory. Suddenly, the energy in the hallway shifted. It was as if I had flipped a switch. Within 2 minutes, the doors to the executive elevators opened, and a team of doctors emerged, walking in a phalanx. Leading them was an older man with silver hair and an air of absolute authority. It was Dr. Vance, the chief of cardiology. He did not look at the financial counselor. He walked straight to me, extending his hand. "Ms. Washington," he said, his voice warm and respectful. "I am Dr. Vance. I will be performing the procedure myself. My team is prepping the hybrid operating suite as we speak. We are going to take excellent care of him." I watched as they moved Pop. They transferred him from the rickety gurney to a high-tech transport bed. They covered him in heated blankets. They treated him like a head of state. I walked beside him, holding his hand until we reached the surgical doors. Dr. Vance looked me in the eye. "Go rest, Ms. Washington. We have the best team in the state. He is in good hands." 4 hours later, I was standing in a room that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a hospital. The presidential suite on the top floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. There was a mahogany dining table, a living area with leather sofas, and a bathroom with marble floors. In the center of the room, in a bed that looked like a cloud, Pop was sleeping peacefully. The monitors beeped a steady, rhythmic, reassuring sound. His color had returned. He was alive. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere down there in the maze of streets, my father was sleeping soundly, believing he had saved money by abandoning us. He thought he was smart. He thought he was safe. I touched the cool glass and watched the traffic below. He had no idea that the man he left for dead was now resting in sheets with a higher thread count than his own. Money really did change everything. It did not just buy things. It bought life. And now that I knew how to use it, I was going to buy something else. I was going to buy justice. The presidential suite was silent, except for the reassuring hum of the medical equipment. Pop was stable and sleeping the sleep of the just. I sat at the mahogany dining table with my laptop open. The city lights twinkled below me, but I was not admiring the view. I was dismantling a life. I had hired a private investigator and a forensic accountant at 9 in the morning, using the concierge service attached to my black card. By noon, I had a digital dossier that detailed every financial secret my father had ever tried to bury. It was worse than I thought. Marcus Washington did not own anything. The cars were leased, the furniture was rented, the company was drowning in toxic debt. But the crown jewel of his deception was the penthouse. He had spent years bragging about the property value, about the custom Italian marble, and the view that cost millions. I scrolled to page 42 of the report and felt a cold smile touch my lips. He did not own the penthouse. He was a tenant, and a bad one. The report showed that he was 6 months behind on rent. He had been dodging the landlord's calls and using legal loopholes to delay eviction. He was living in a glass castle that he could not afford, pretending to be a king while the walls were closing in. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the listing agent mentioned in the report. She answered on the second ring, sounding stressed and exhausted. I told her I was interested in the penthouse at the Millennium Tower. She hesitated immediately. She told me it was a complicated listing. She told me there was a difficult tenant currently residing there who was refusing to vacate. She warned me that it would be a legal nightmare to get him out. The owner was desperate, she explained. He was facing foreclosure on the unit himself because he could not cover the mortgage without the rental income. He wanted a cash buyer who could close in 48 hours. He was willing to slash the price by 30% just to be done with the headache. I looked at the asking price. It was a significant amount of money, but it was well within the limits of my new reality. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the sleeping form of my grandfather. Marcus had kicked us out of his life because we were poor. He had left his father to die because he did not want to pay a bill. It was only fitting that his punishment should mirror his crime. I told the agent to draft the paperwork immediately. I told her I would pay cash. I told her I did not need to see the apartment because I knew it intimately. I knew exactly where the wine stains were on the carpet. I knew which floorboards creaked. And most importantly, I knew exactly how the light hit the living room floor in the morning. I hung up the phone with a sense of grim satisfaction. Marcus thought he was safe in his tower. He did not realize that the building had just been sold and his daughter was about to become his landlord. The eviction notice was not going to come from a stranger. It was going to come from me. The closing took less than 40 minutes. Mr. Sterling sat opposite me at the mahogany dining table in the hospital suite with a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse. We utilized a blind trust to execute the purchase. It was a sterile entity named North Star Holdings. My father would see that name on the legal notices and assume it was just another faceless investment firm buying up distressed real estate. He would never suspect that the person signing the checks was the daughter he had discarded like a used napkin. I signed the final page of the deed with a steady hand. The wire transfer had already cleared. $2.4 million moved from my account to the desperate owner's bank in a matter of seconds. It was a staggering amount of money, but the return on investment was going to be priceless. Just like that, I was the owner of the Millennium Tower penthouse. I owned the Italian marble floors my stepmother walked on. I owned the walls where my brother hung his framed degrees. I owned the very air they were breathing. Mr. Sterling organized the papers into a neat pile and then slid a second thinner file toward me. "This is the tenant ledger," he said, his voice professional and devoid of emotion. "As the private investigator suspected, the current tenant is significantly in arrears. He is 6 months behind on rent plus late fees and interest. The total outstanding balance is $48,000. I looked at the numbers. They were just digits on a page, but they represented months of my father lying to his social circle while living on stolen time. He was squatting in luxury. He was throwing parties and hosting dinners in a home he had no right to occupy. "What are your instructions, Ms. Washington?" Mr. Sterling asked. "Do you want to begin standard eviction proceedings? That can take months if he fights it." I shook my head. "No, I do not want a long court battle. I want shock and awe. Send him a 3-day notice to pay or quit." Mr. Sterling paused, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That is aggressive. In California, that gives him exactly 72 hours to pay the full balance in certified funds or vacate the premises immediately. If he fails to pay, the sheriff can lock him out by the end of the week." "That is exactly what I want," I said. I picked up the pen one last time. I signed the demand letter authorizing the property management company to execute the order. I imagined Marcus receiving this. I imagined the color draining from his face when he realized his delay tactics had run out. He would panic. He would scramble. He would scream at his family. But he would have nowhere to turn. He had burned every bridge he ever built, including the one that led to me. "Serve him first thing in the morning," I commanded, closing the file. "Make sure the process server hands it to him personally. I want him to look a stranger in the eye and realize that his castle has crumbled. The clock starts tomorrow. 3 days, 72 hours." The countdown to his destruction had officially begun. I walked into the polished marble interior of Barney's, not because I cared about fashion, but because the hospital blankets were scratchy and Pop deserved to recover in cashmere. I was running my hand over a display of Italian silk pajamas when a familiar screeching voice cut through the hushed atmosphere of the store. It was the sound of a woman who believed the world owed her attention. I froze. Standing 3 aisles over, clutching a limited edition handbag like it was a holy relic, was Brittany. She looked different than she had at the motel. Her makeup was applied a little too heavily, as if trying to cover up stress lines, and she was looking at the price tag of the bag with a mixture of hunger and desperation. She caught sight of me, and her eyes narrowed. She dropped the price tag and marched over her heels, clicking aggressively on the floor. She scanned my outfit, which was still the simple jeans and sweater I had changed into, and let out a harsh laugh. "Did you get lost looking for the food court, Zara?" She sneered loud enough for a sales associate to look up. "Or are you here to pick up a DoorDash order for one of the employees? You know the service entrance is in the back right. You really should not be wandering around the sales floor. You are scaring the paying customers." I did not flinch. I continued to fold the silk pajama set I had selected. "I am shopping, Brittany," I said calmly. "Same as you. Although looking at the way you put that bag back, I assume you are just browsing today." Brittany's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "I am waiting for Marcus to transfer funds." She lied, her voice pitching up. "We are moving assets around. Not that you would understand how wealth management works. This bag is practically mine already. I just need to decide if the color suits my season." She turned back to the display of handbags. There were 6 of them lined up on a glass shelf, each one costing more than my old car. She reached out to stroke the leather of a cream-colored tote, looking at it with naked longing. It was pathetic. She was trying to fill the hole in her life with things she could no longer afford. I signaled the store manager, who had been hovering nearby. He approached quickly, sensing the shift in power dynamics. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, ignoring Brittany completely. "Yes," I said, keeping my eyes locked on my sister-in-law. "I will take this pajama set. And I see that lady over there is admiring the autumn collection." Brittany puffed up her chest, ready to gloat. "See, even she knows I have taste." "I want that bag," I said, pointing to the one Brittany was holding. "And the blue one next to it. Actually, just give me the entire shelf. All 6 of them." "I do not want to choose." Brittany froze. Her hand went slack and the bag slipped from her fingers, hitting the carpet with a soft thud. The manager beamed. "An excellent choice, madam. Shall I have them wrapped or sent to your residence?" "Send them to the Millennium Tower penthouse," I said, clearly watching the color drain from Brittany's face. "But do not send them to apartment 4B. Send them to the owner's suite." I pulled out the black card and handed it to the manager. Brittany stood there with her mouth open, unable to speak, unable to move. She looked at the empty shelf where her dreams had sat just a moment ago. And then she looked at me. For the first time, she did not see a victim. She saw a monster of her own making. I took my receipt and walked out without a backward glance, leaving her standing in the wreckage of her own envy, surrounded by things she could touch but never own. The doorbell rang at 9 in the morning, cutting through the tense silence of the penthouse like a knife. Marcus was nursing a hangover and a cup of black coffee, while Trey sat on the sofa aggressively ignoring the red numbers on his laptop screen. When Marcus opened the door, he did not find a guest or a delivery. He found a man with a thick neck and a clipboard, who shoved a manila envelope into his chest before he could even speak. "You have been served," the man grunted, and walked away toward the elevator without a backward glance. Marcus tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the letterhead of a law firm he did not recognize acting on behalf of North Star Holdings. The words were stark and brutal. 3-day notice to pay or quit. The demand was for $48,000 in certified funds to be delivered within 72 hours, or possession of the property would revert to the owner. Trey looked up from the couch, fear evident in his eyes. "What is it, Dad? Is it the bank?" "It is an intimidation tactic," Marcus scoffed, walking into the kitchen and holding the paper over the trash can. He did not read the fine print. He did not notice the date. He simply saw a threat from a faceless corporation, and his arrogance kicked in. North Star Holdings, who are these people? Probably some shell company buying bad debt. They think they can scare Marcus Washington with a piece of paper. He ripped the document in half. Then he ripped it again, letting the confetti rain down into the garbage disposal. "They cannot kick us out in 3 days, Trey. Eviction takes months. I have friends in the housing court. I play golf with the district judge. By the time they actually get a hearing scheduled, we will be back on top." He poured himself another cup of coffee, his mind already racing away from the danger, constructing a new reality where he was still in control. "We just need a bridge loan," Marcus said, his eyes lighting up with a manic energy. "We need one big investor to cover the liquidity gap until the market corrects itself." He turned to his son, snapping his fingers. "Thanksgiving is this Thursday. We are going to host a dinner. Not a family dinner, a gala. We will invite the Cartwrights. Old man Cartwright has been looking for a place to park his capital since he sold his shipping logistics firm. If I can get him in this room, if I can get him drunk on my scotch and impressed by this view, I can close him for $500,000. But Dad..." Trey stammered. "We have no money for catering. The credit cards are maxed out." "Then sell something." Marcus roared, slamming his hand on the counter. "Sell your watch. Sell Brittany's bags. I do not care what you have to do, but get the best caterer in the city. Get the vintage wine. We need to look successful to be successful. This dinner is not a celebration, Trey. It is a rescue mission." He looked around the apartment he had just been ordered to vacate, feeling a surge of proprietary pride. He really believed the walls belonged to him. He really believed he could charm his way out of a legal contract. He had no idea that the landlord was not a stranger who could be charmed. He had no idea that he was planning a party in a house that was already rigged to explode, and he was lighting the fuse himself. The preparations for the Thanksgiving gala were not a labor of love, they were a frantic attempt to plaster over a crumbling wall with gold leaf. Inside the penthouse, the air was thick with the smell of desperation and hairspray. Marcus was pacing the living room, barking orders into his phone, while Brittany directed a team of movers who were replacing the rented furniture with even more expensive rented furniture. They had pawned Trey's Rolex and Brittany's diamond tennis bracelet to pay for the deposit on a set of Louis XIV chairs and a crystal chandelier that had to be installed by a specialist. It was a financial suicide mission. They were burning the furniture to heat the house, unaware that the roof was already on fire. "I want the hydrangeas to be white," Brittany screamed at a terrified florist. "Purely white. If I see a single spot of cream, I will sue you into bankruptcy." She was running on caffeine and panic, her eyes darting around the room looking for flaws that might give away their poverty. She had invited the society editor of the Napa Valley Register and a freelance photographer from the Chronicle. She did not just want a dinner, she wanted a headline. She needed the world to see that the Washington family was still on top, still untouchable, and still rich. Marcus was huddled in the corner with Trey going over the seating chart like it was a battle plan. We put Cartwright next to me, Marcus hissed, stabbing the paper with his finger. And we put the reporter on his left. I want every laugh, every toast, and every handshake documented. When Cartwright signs that check, I want it to be the caption on the front page of the business section. Do not let him talk to anyone else, Trey. You are his shadow tonight. If he goes to the bathroom, you wait by the door. We cannot afford for him to hear any rumors about the firm. I watched all of this unfold from the comfort of an ergonomic chair in the security office of the building. As the new owner of the Millennium Tower, I had full access to the surveillance system. The grainy black and white footage on the monitor was better than any reality television show I had ever seen. I watched my father sweat through his shirt. I watched Brittany yell at a caterer until she was blue in the face. I watched my brother dry heave into the kitchen sink before chugging a glass of tap water. It was fascinating to see them scurrying around my apartment, polishing my floors and arranging flowers on my tables. They were building a stage for a play that I had already canceled. I zoomed in on the coffee table where the torn pieces of the eviction notice still sat in the wastebasket. Marcus had ignored the warning. He truly believed he could charm his way out of a legal contract with a bottle of vintage wine and a firm handshake. He thought he was the puppet master pulling the strings of the city's elite. He had no idea that I was the one holding the scissors. I took a sip of my tea and leaned back, watching Brittany hold up a dress she had likely put on a credit card that was hours away from being declined. She twirled in front of the mirror, practicing her fake smile. The same smile she had used when she mocked my clothes. The same smile she used when she called my grandfather trash. Enjoy it, I whispered to the screen. Enjoy the fantasy while it lasts. Because when the clock strikes midnight, this carriage turns back into a pumpkin, and I am going to be the one to smash it. The guests were coming, the trap was set, and the turkeys were already in the oven. The evening arrived cloaked in a velvet darkness that was pierced only by the shimmer of the city lights below. Inside the penthouse, the air was perfumed with the scent of roasting duck and the metallic tang of fear masked by heavy, expensive colognes. The guests had arrived right on time. They were a collection of Napa Valley's finest, checking each other's net worths with quick, calculating glances. Men in bespoke tuxedos stood in clusters swirling cognac in heated snifters, while women in gowns that cost more than a mid-sized sedan laughed delicately at jokes that were not funny. The atmosphere was electric, with the specific kind of energy that only exists when rich people gather to validate each other's existence. Marcus Washington moved through the room like a shark in a tank of guppies. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, a remnant of better days when his bank accounts were actually black. In his hand was a glass of scotch that cost $40 a shot. He was laughing too loudly. His hand rested too heavily on the shoulders of men he barely knew. He was performing the role of his life. To look at him, you would never guess that the champagne in his glass was bought on credit or that the art on the walls was rented by the hour. He was selling a dream, and tonight he was his own best customer. He spotted his target near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Mr. Cartwright was a short, stout man with a face like a bulldog and a wallet deep enough to drown in. He was staring out at the view, his expression unreadable. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks and slid up beside him, signaling the waiter to refill Cartwright's glass before it was even empty. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Marcus said, gesturing grandly to the sprawling city grid below. "It never gets old. Sometimes I stand here at 3 in the morning and just watch the world turn. It gives you perspective, Cartwright. It reminds you that we are the ones turning the gears." Cartwright took a sip of his drink and nodded slowly. "It is an impressive property, Marcus. I had heard rumors that the building was going condo. Are you planning to keep the lease? Or are you looking to move to the suburbs?" Marcus laughed, a deep, resonant sound that came from his diaphragm and not his happiness. Lease. Please, Cartwright. I do not lease. Renting is for people who are not sure where they want to be. I am very sure. Actually, I am in the final stages of purchasing the unit. The papers are sitting on my desk right now. I decided to buy the whole floor, actually. I need the extra space for a home gym and a library. You know how it is. You accumulate success, and you need room to store it. Brittany drifted by at that moment, looking like a shimmering disco ball in a silver sequined gown. She hooked her arm through Marcus's, playing the devoted wife to perfection. "Oh, stop bragging, darling," she purred, tapping his chest playfully. "You are going to bore poor Mr. Cartwright with talk of real estate. But it is true. We are just waiting for the title transfer. We are thinking of knocking down the east wall to expand the master suite. The light in the morning is just too good not to maximize." Cartwright looked impressed. His eyes, which had been guarded, finally softened. "I admire a man who plants roots," he said, raising his glass. "It shows stability. It shows confidence in the market." "I have to admit, Marcus, I was hesitant about your firm's liquidity given the rumors. But seeing this, seeing how you live, it puts my mind at ease. A man does not buy a $10 million penthouse if he is on the brink of collapse." "Exactly," Marcus said, clapping him on the back. "Rumors are just noise created by the jealous. We are doing better than ever. In fact, that is why I invited you here. I want to give you the first refusal on a new opportunity I am structuring. It is exclusive. I am keeping the buy-in high to keep the riffraff out." He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is going to yield 20% by Q3. But we can talk numbers later. Tonight is about family. Tonight is about gratitude." He guided Cartwright toward the dining table where Trey was frantically signaling the waiters to pour more wine. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. He had him. The hook was set. He had lied about the ownership. He had lied about the renovation. He had lied about his entire life, and Cartwright had swallowed it whole. Marcus looked around the room at the crystal chandelier he did not own and the guests he did not like and felt invincible. He raised his glass to the room, demanding silence for a toast. To prosperity, he boomed, his voice echoing off the rented walls. To vision, and to owning your future no matter the cost. The room erupted in applause. Glasses clinked. Marcus smiled, drinking in the adoration. He truly believed he had pulled it off. He truly believed that the piece of paper he had shredded in the kitchen was just trash. He did not know that 72 hours had passed exactly 3 minutes ago. He did not know that the clock had stopped, and he certainly did not know that the elevator was currently rising toward the penthouse, carrying not another guest, but a team of sheriff's deputies with a battering ram. The applause for my father's toast was still rippling through the room when the private elevator chimed. It was a sound that was not supposed to happen. Marcus had given strict instructions to the concierge that no one was to be admitted without his express permission. He frowned, looking toward the foyer, annoyed that his moment of triumph was being interrupted by what he assumed was a late caterer or a delivery of more ice. The heavy brass doors slid open with a smooth, mechanical hiss. The chatter in the room did not just fade, it was severed. Silence descended upon the penthouse like a heavy wool blanket. I stepped out of the elevator. I was not wearing the stained apron of a sous chef. I was not wearing the clearance rack sweater I had worn to the bank. I was wearing a custom Givenchy haute couture gown that had been flown in from Paris that morning. It was a deep blood-red silk that draped over my body like liquid armor, structured at the shoulders and flowing into a train that swept the floor with a whisper of authority. Around my neck sat a diamond choker that caught the light of the chandelier and threw it back with blinding intensity. It was the kind of jewelry that did not just whisper wealth, it screamed old money. But I was not alone. On my arm stood Ezekiel Washington. The man my father had left to die in a Motel 6 was now standing tall, his posture corrected by pride and excellent medical care. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that fit him perfectly, hiding the bandages on his chest. In his hand he held a cane made of polished ebony with a solid gold handle, not because he needed it to walk, but because it made him look like a king. He did not look like a retired railroad worker. He looked like an oil tycoon who had just bought the railroad. We walked into the room together. The sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor was the only noise in the penthouse. I saw Brittany first. She was standing near the buffet holding a crab cake halfway to her mouth. Her eyes were fixed on my dress. She knew fashion. She knew exactly what she was looking at. She was looking at $60,000 of hand-stitched silk, and she looked like she was about to choke. The silver sequins on her gown suddenly looked cheap and tacky like tinfoil next to a ruby. Marcus lowered his glass. His face went through a complex series of gymnastics. Confusion followed by recognition, followed by a flash of pure terror that he quickly tried to mask with anger. He stepped forward, his smile looking more like a rictus of pain. "Zara," he hissed, his voice low, but audible in the silent room. "What the hell are you doing here, and why is he here?" "You are embarrassing me. This is a private event." I stopped in the center of the room. I did not look at him. I looked at Mr. Cartwright, who was staring at Pop Pop with a look of intense curiosity. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice clear and melodic, projecting to the back of the room without shouting. "I apologize for the interruption. We just wanted to stop by and check on the property." "Property?" Marcus sputtered. His face was turning a dangerous shade of purple. He looked at the guests who were now watching this drama with rapt attention. "My apologies, everyone. My daughter is a bit confused. She has been under a lot of strain lately." He turned to me, his eyes bulging. "Get out. Now. Before I call security and have you dragged out. Take your grandfather and go back to the gutter where you belong." Pop Pop tapped his gold-handled cane on the floor. It was a sharp, authoritative sound. He looked his son up and down, taking in the rented tuxedo and the desperation sweating from his pores. "We are not going anywhere, Marcus," the old man said, his voice raspy but strong. "You invited guests to a dinner. It would be rude of us not to say hello, especially since we paid for the roof over their heads." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mr. Cartwright stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked from Marcus to Pop Pop. He recognized the quality of the suit. He recognized the bearing of a man who owes nothing to anyone. Marcus looked like he had been slapped. He opened his mouth to scream, to assert his dominance, to throw us out with his bare hands if necessary. But then he looked at me again. He looked at the diamonds. He looked at the dress. He looked at the cold, hard certainty in my eyes. And for the first time in his life, he realized that the script had changed. He was no longer the director. He was just an actor who had forgotten his lines, and the curtain was about to fall on his head. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. It was the kind of silence where you could hear the ice melting in the glasses of 50 stunned guests. Marcus looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically like a trapped animal searching for an exit that did not exist. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry, strangulated cough. "This is a joke," he stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "A sick, twisted joke. My daughter has always had a flair for the dramatic. She is clearly having a mental breakdown. I will call the hospital. Everyone please just ignore her." He reached for my arm, trying to physically steer me toward the door. I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply held up a hand, and 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies stepped out of the elevator behind me. They stood silently, arms crossed, their badges glinting under the crystal chandelier. Marcus froze, his hand hovering inches from my silk sleeve. "I am not the one having a breakdown, Marcus," I said, my voice cool and steady. "And this is not a joke. You were served a 3-day notice to pay or quit exactly 72 hours ago. I watched you tear it up. I watched you throw it in the trash can in that kitchen. You thought if you destroyed the paper, the debt would disappear. You were wrong." I turned to Mr. Cartwright, who was standing frozen with his drink halfway to his mouth. I walked over to him and extended a manila folder. "Mr. Cartwright, I believe you were about to write a check to this man," I said. "You might want to look at this first. It is a copy of the building's ledger. Marcus is not buying this unit. He has not paid rent in 6 months. He is currently $48,000 in debt to the management company. The wine you are drinking was bought on credit. The furniture you are sitting on is rented. There is no investment fund. There is only a Ponzi scheme built on desperate loans and lies. Cartwright took the folder. He opened it slowly. His eyes scanned the columns of red numbers. The silence stretched tight as a bowstring. Finally, he snapped the folder shut. He looked at Marcus, not with anger, but with profound pity. "You told me you were buying the floor," Cartwright said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "You told me you were liquid." "I am liquid," Marcus pleaded, his hands shaking. "It is just a cash flow issue, a temporary hiccup." "Cartwright, please. We have known each other for years." "I do not know you at all," Cartwright replied. He placed his glass on a passing tray with a decisive clink. "I do not do business with frauds. Good evening." He walked past Marcus without looking at him. That was the signal. The dam broke. The other guests, seeing the most powerful man in the room leave, began to scramble. It was a mass exodus. Women grabbed their clutches. Men downed the last of their drinks, and everyone moved toward the elevator, avoiding eye contact with the Washington family. Brittany stood by the buffet, trembling with rage and humiliation. She tried to grab the arm of a socialite she had been courting all night. "Nancy, wait," she cried. "We can explain." Nancy pulled her arm away as if Brittany were contagious. "Do not touch me," she hissed. "Do not ever call me again." Within 3 minutes, the room was empty. The laughter was gone. The music was gone. The only things left were the half-eaten canapés, the rented furniture, and the 3 people who had tried to build a kingdom on quicksand. Marcus stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of his ego. He looked at the closed elevator doors, then he turned slowly to face me. The look in his eyes was not regret. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. "You ruined everything," he whispered. I looked at him standing beside my grandfather, who was leaning on his cane like a patriarch. "No, Dad," I said. "I just turned on the lights. You are the one who made the mess." I walked toward the main banquet table, where the centerpiece of white hydrangeas sat, mocking the chaos around it. With a sweep of my arm, I cleared the expensive crystal glasses and porcelain plates, sending them crashing to the floor. The sound was violent and necessary. It stopped everyone in their tracks, including the few guests who were lingering by the doorway, hoping to catch one last glimpse of the train wreck. I did not just place the documents on the table. I threw them. The heavy leather-bound portfolio hit the polished wood with a thud that echoed like a gavel strike. It slid across the surface, stopping inches from Marcus's trembling hand. The cover fell open, revealing the 2 documents that defined his new reality. On the left was the purchase agreement, stamped and notarized. On the right was the grant deed, the official title to the property transferred this very afternoon. "Read it," I commanded, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the staff and the remaining spectators. "Read the name on the deed, Marcus. It does not say Millennium Management anymore, and it certainly does not say Marcus Washington." He looked down. He did not want to look, but he could not help himself. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, desperate to find a loophole, desperate to find a mistake. He saw the entity name North Star Holdings. He looked up at me, a flicker of confusion mixing with his fear. "North Star," he whispered, his voice shaking. "This is a shell company. You are bluffing. You hired someone to forge this. You do not have this kind of money. You are a line cook, Zara. You make $12 an hour." "Turn to page 4, I said, cold and unyielding. "Look at the signature of the managing member." He flipped the page. I watched the blood drain from his face until he looked like a wax figure. There in black ink was my signature, Zara Washington. And right below it was the stamp of the bank verifying the funds. $2.4 million paid in full. Cash. The room erupted in fresh whispers. The waiters exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing a coup. The society reporter, who had been hiding near the bar, scribbled furiously in her notebook. This was not the story Marcus had invited her to write, but it was the story that would be on the front page tomorrow. The great Marcus Washington exposed as a fraud by his own daughter. I leaned over the table, placing my hands flat on the wood, invading his space. "You called me a rat," I said softly so only he and the nearby staff could hear. "You said I belonged in the gutter. You said money was the only thing that mattered. Well, I listened to you, Dad. I went out and I got the money. I played by your rules. And now I own the very ground you are standing on." Brittany snatched the deed from the table, her eyes scanning the numbers. Her knees gave out and she collapsed into one of the Louis XIV chairs she had rented. "It is real," she gasped, staring at me with a mixture of horror and awe. "She actually bought it. She owns the penthouse. Marcus, we are homeless." Marcus stood there paralyzed. The paper slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor, joining the broken glass. He looked at the deed lying amidst the shards, and for the first time he understood the magnitude of his defeat. He was not just broke, he was evicted by the daughter he had thrown away. The irony was a noose, and it was tightening around his neck with every second that ticked by. I straightened up and signaled to the deputies. "Officers," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I believe these trespassers have overstayed their welcome. Please escort them off my property." But I was not done. The eviction was just the physical blow. I needed to deliver the moral one. I needed to make sure that even if he managed to scrape together a few dollars in the future, no decent human being would ever shake his hand again. Marcus was staring at the deed on the floor, his mind clearly racing, trying to formulate an accusation. "You stole it!" he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "That money belongs to the family. You tricked me. You manipulated a senile old man to get access to his accounts. That is fraud, Zara. I will have you arrested. I will sue you for every penny." I laughed. It was a genuine sound of amusement that chilled the room. "You really do not remember, do you, Dad? You are so used to signing things without reading them." I reached into the portfolio again. This time I pulled out the document he had signed in the motel room just 48 hours ago. The disclaimer of interest. I held it up so the remaining investors and the press could see the bold header. "You did not want Pop's assets," I said, my voice carrying clearly. "You thought he only had debt. You were so terrified of paying for his heart surgery that you legally severed yourself from his estate. You signed this waiver. You voluntarily gave up your claim to the Washington Family Trust." I took a step closer to him. "Do you want to know what was in that trust, Marcus? Do you want to know what you threw away because you were too arrogant to look past a dirty book cover? $12,400,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Marcus stopped breathing. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes rolled back slightly, as if his brain was trying to reject the information. Brittany let out a high-pitched whimper and buried her face in her hands. "But that is just business." I continued walking toward the DJ booth where my phone was still connected to the sound system. "Losing money makes you a fool. But what you said about your own father makes you a monster. And I want everyone here to know exactly who they have been drinking with." I pressed play. My father's voice boomed through the high-end speakers, amplified to a deafening volume. It was crystal clear. Every sneer, every ounce of venom was preserved in high definition. "He lived a worthless life, and now he is dying a worthless death. Do not ruin my spa day with your hysteria. If he dies, call the city morgue. They bury indigent people for free. Just do not call me." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy with disgust. It was physical. You could feel the revulsion radiating from the guests. These were people who understood greed. They understood ruthlessness in business. But this was something else. This was a violation of the most basic human code. A prominent venture capitalist, who had been considering investing in Marcus's firm, slowly placed his glass on a waiter's tray. He looked at Marcus with an expression of pure loathing. "You left your father to die in a ditch so you could get a massage," he said, his voice quiet, but cutting. Marcus reached out to him, desperate. "Bob, please." It was taken out of context. She edited the tape. "Do not touch me," the man snapped, backing away. "My father was a mechanic. He worked his fingers to the bone for me. If I ever spoke about him the way you just did, I would hope someone would shoot me. The deal is off, Marcus. Do not ever contact my firm again." He turned and walked out. The others followed. It was a procession of judgment. They did not just leave, they fled. They wanted to get away from the stench of Marcus's soul. Within seconds, the room was empty save for the staff, the deputies, and the family he had destroyed. Marcus stood alone in the center of the room, stripped of his money, stripped of his reputation, and stripped of his lies. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw the one thing I had always wanted to see in his eyes: regret. But it was too late. The check had come due and he had nothing left to pay with. The deputy stepped forward, his hand resting casually but meaningfully on his belt. The silence in the penthouse was replaced by the crackle of his radio. "Mr. Washington," the officer said, his voice flat and bored. "You have been asked to leave by the legal owner. You are now trespassing. You have exactly 5 minutes to gather your personal effects and vacate the premises. If you are not out the door by then, we will assist you. And I do not think you want to be dragged out in a tuxedo." Marcus looked at the deputy, then at me. His face was a mask of disbelief. He opened his mouth to argue, perhaps to claim squatters' rights or threaten a lawsuit, but the fight had left him. He looked small. The grandeur he had projected all night evaporated, leaving behind a terrified middle-aged man with nowhere to go. But Brittany did not go quietly. The realization that her life of luxury was a hologram shattered her completely. She turned on Marcus with the ferocity of a cornered animal. She slammed her expensive clutch into his chest, the sound of the metal clasp hitting his sternum echoing in the room. "You liar!" she screamed, her face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. "You told me everything was handled. You told me we were rich. You let me humiliate myself in front of everyone." "Brittany, please," Marcus stammered, trying to catch her wrists. "I can fix this. I just need a little time." "Fix it." She laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "You are broke, Marcus. You are worse than broke. You are a fraud. I wasted the best years of my life on you. I could have married a hedge fund manager. I could have been someone. Instead, I am being evicted by your dishwasher daughter." She scrambled toward the bedroom, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. "I am taking my furs," she yelled over her shoulder. "I am taking the jewelry. You are not dragging me down with you." The deputy signaled to his partner. "Go with her. Make sure she only takes what belongs to her. No fixtures, no rented items." I watched as the partner followed her. A moment later, I heard screaming from the master suite. She was being told she could not take the artwork. She was being told she could not take the designer sheets because they were part of the staging contract. She came back out moments later, dragging a single suitcase, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. She looked at Marcus with pure venom. "Do not follow me," she spat. "I am going to my mother's. I am filing for divorce in the morning." She stormed into the elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly. Marcus stood alone in the center of the room. He looked at Trey, who was cowering by the kitchen island, trying to make himself invisible. Even his son would not look him in the eye. "Time is up, sir," the lead deputy said, taking Marcus firmly by the elbow. Marcus looked at me one last time. There was no arrogance left, only a deep, hollow shame. He did not say a word. He allowed himself to be led to the elevator, his feet dragging slightly on the floor he had pretended to own. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of his defeat. I stood in the silence of the penthouse, the air still smelling of expensive perfume and stale fear. I looked at Pop Pop. He nodded slowly, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. The trash had finally been taken out. It was over. The man who had loomed over my life like a dark cloud for 25 years was gone, evicted from his own fantasy by the daughter he had deemed worthless. I stood there for a long moment staring at the brushed steel reflection of myself. I did not look like the scared girl who had walked into the bank 3 days ago. I looked like the woman who had burned the kingdom down to save the king. The room was quiet now. The few remaining waiters were huddled by the kitchen door, looking terrified, expecting the new owner to be as tyrannical as the last one. I turned to them and smiled. It was a genuine smile. "You are all paid for the night," I said. "Take the food home to your families, open the good champagne, celebrate. Just leave us the Cabernet." They scrambled to obey, relief washing over their faces. Within minutes, the penthouse was empty, save for me and Ezekiel Washington. I walked over to the mahogany table where the open bottle of vintage Screaming Eagle sat. It was a $3,000 bottle of wine that Marcus had opened to impress a stranger. Now it would be used to toast his defeat. I poured 2 glasses, the dark red liquid swirling against the crystal. I walked over to Pop, who was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the glittering grid of the city below. He did not look frail anymore. He looked like a titan who had weathered the storm. He took the glass from my hand, his fingers steady. "He is gone." Pop, I whispered, standing beside him. "He can never hurt us again. We are safe." Pop looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You did good, Zara. You fought for us when I was too weak to fight. Your grandmother would have been proud. She always said you had fire in you." I clinked my glass against his. "To the underdogs," I said. "To family," he corrected, gently taking a sip. "The real kind." We stood there in silence, watching the city lights. Down there, somewhere on the cold pavement, Marcus was standing with his suitcases, hailing a taxi he probably could not afford. He was starting his life over from zero, just like he had forced us to do. It was poetic, it was just. But mostly, it was finished. I stepped away from the window and walked toward the center of the room. The camera tracked my movement, focusing on the sharp lines of my red dress and the cold resolve in my eyes. I looked directly into the lens, breaking the fourth wall, addressing the audience that had watched my transformation. People always tell you to take the high road. They tell you to be kind, to forgive, to turn the other cheek. But they forget that some people will just slap that cheek too. My father thought my kindness was weakness. He thought my silence was submission. He thought he could crush us because we were good. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine, tasting the oak and the victory. He was wrong. Goodness does not mean being a doormat. Sometimes being good means having the strength to do what is necessary. I destroyed his life to save ours, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. I set the glass down on the table, the sound echoing in the empty penthouse. Because in a world full of wolves, being a sheep is not a virtue, it is a death sentence. Sometimes you have to show your teeth. Sometimes you have to become the villain in their story to protect the innocent in yours. I turned and walked back to my grandfather, leaving the frame empty. The screen faded to black. The most profound lesson from Zara's journey is that arrogance is the architect of its own destruction. Marcus judged value solely by appearance, discarding a dirty book and his own family as trash, never realizing they held the true fortune. He learned too late that integrity and loyalty are currencies far more stable than status. Conversely, Zara teaches us that kindness is not weakness. True strength isn't about domination. It's about having the courage to protect the vulnerable. When pushed, we must be willing to show our teeth, because dignity is the only asset that cannot be bought, only defended. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who couldn't see your true worth? Share your story of resilience in the comments below.